I'd like to welcome Jack and get him to tell me more about what's happening locally. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here today. I am really pleased to be here today. When I was reappointed to the Cabinet in May in 2012, the leader of the council, Julie Dore, told me that she wanted air quality to be one of the top priorities for us this year. I'll talk in a bit about some of the actions that we've taken, which I think are groundbreaking. Certainly in London, there was a view from some of the MPs that I spoke to that Sheffield was doing more than any other core city on air quality. And I'm sure for many people that isn't enough, and it's not enough for me either. And certainly in terms of the impact that's having, we know that isn't enough. But actually, I do take some comfort that that isn't for a lack of leadership or a lack of visibility, hopefully on my part. I suppose I want to set a context which is national, and then translate that into some of the local actions that we're trying to take. And I'm really keen that in the panel discussions in the rest of this conference, we have a discussion about exactly how we get to engage the public more on this issue, because I don't mind kind of sharing with you that I was elected first in May 2010, so I've only ever been a councillor under this government, and of all the things the council's done, of all the things we've had to close, all the kind of money we've had taken away, without a shadow of a doubt, the single biggest issue that I received emails about wasn't sort of some of the very big public things, wasn't some of the big kind of controversial things. The single biggest issue that I received emails about, I had 250 emails in about 3 days, was when we said we wanted to reduce the speed limit on the M1. And that was people kind of being absolutely incandescent with rage, furious, beyond comprehension, frankly, that they would be asked to kind of take an extra minute or two on a motorway, which they saw as their right to do at whatever speed they so wished. So for me, that I think probably highlighted the length we've got to go. Those of us who are passionate about air quality, who want to see improved air quality, I think that probably highlighted for me just the distance we've got to travel, because actually, if we're very honest with ourselves, we haven't got the public with us on lots of these issues. If you I don't really recommend it, but if you ever wanted to read the comments that there are underneath newspaper articles, firstly, you realise just how many strange people there are in the world, and angry people as well, for that matter. And secondly, you realise actually that we have not yet persuaded the public of the importance of air quality issues, and because it is such a silent killer, because it is so invisible, I think it is much easier for people to kind of zoom past it and not want to engage with it, getting quite angry when we start talking about people's actions and choices being part of the challenge, as well as actions and choices that are different, which are part of the solution. So I'm really pleased to be here today, because I fundamentally believe that actually not only is air quality really important for making our city more economically competitive, it's actually a fundamental component of making our city fairer as well, because as always within Sheffield, the impact of poor air is felt disproportionately in our poorer areas, actually. So I think somebody made a point recently that actually one of the areas with the poorest air quality in the city is Broome Hall, which is also one of the areas which has the lowest car ownership. So that is an example to me. Another example is in Tinsley, where we know there are people facing compounding disadvantages, and actually air quality is a further compounding impact of that. So for me, this isn't just about having clean air because that's really important. This is about having clean air because without cleaner air, we cannot have a fairer city, which is what I certainly stood for election in order to try and achieve. We've also got to be honest about it, that actually big parts of our society and big parts of our economy are predicated on polluting the air. And in some ways, I think this is a bit like speeding, that there are some parts of our society, and I'm not moaning about this, I'm just kind of setting out what I see the challenge to be, that there are some parts of our society where they almost see it as their right to pollute. Actually, they always kind of, and to hell with the consequences, and I will do what I want to do, and everyone else does it anyway, so it's up to me to do what I want to do, and you know, nobody will stop me. I think some of the actions that we're taking now, some of the actions that we've got planned to take in the very near future will help to address that, but I'm also really clear that actually, despite those actions and what we're trying to do, which I would suggest are some of the most groundbreaking in the country, and we're doing more work on air quality than perhaps any other administration's ever done in Sheffield, certainly in recent memory, they are insufficient for changing public attitudes. And I believe that we will not change the basics of air quality with technology, and we had the conversation about Euro 3s and 4s and 5s already. We won't fix this issue with technology, we'll have to fix it by a much harder issue of public engagement, and that's where I think we need help, partly because we can't afford to do that as a council, but also because actually we're not especially good at it sometimes either. So for me, it seems really important that we work across the city to get that level of public engagement, to get people and communities to realise the impact that air quality, pollution and air quality problems have. And that seems to me the most sensible way forward. So on some of the other things, I wanted to talk for a bit about the Quality Bus Partnership, where I think we've seen some really good indicators actually. So in 2012, the average age of our buses in Sheffield was 9.8 years old. But by 2014, that average age had reduced to 8.6 years. So we all got 2 years older, and our buses got 1 year younger, which is interesting. In 2012, I think 83% of our stagecoach buses were Euro 3 or more. We all know the limitations with that modelling, but actually 83% were Euro 3 or more in 2012, and now that figure is 98%. So there's an improvement in that. Well, that's only to Euro 3 standard. In terms of Euro 5 standard, in 2012, just 1% of the first fleet met Euro 5 standards, and today that figure is 23%. And for Stagecoach, I think 52% of their buses are now Euro 5. So that is a significant change that would not have happened without a Quality Bus Partnership. We've also, and perhaps this is more important in terms of air quality, I'd suggest, than the Euro style changes, we've also actually started to reverse the long-term decline in bus patronage that we've seen in Sheffield. So we know at one point Sheffield had more buses than any other city and more bus patronage in the 80s than I think Manchester and Liverpool combined, or something like that. We had a huge kind of bus-heavy city, which declined following deregulation really quite speedily. And that started to decline, so that started to change, and we're turning that around now. So in the last 12 months alone, there's been an extra 4 million passengers on our buses. That's fantastic. I said this to somebody the other day, and they said, yeah, but that's only because the trams weren't working. And I'm assured that isn't why, and actually it is because that is around the people kind of starting to go on buses more and then staying on them when they're doing it as well. So in terms of mode shift, I think that's something we all need to see much more of. There is some cause for optimism. I'm not going to pretend that is the solution or that we have cracked it, but I think there is some cause for optimism in there. And next week we'll also be rolling out the new touch card for integrated payments and integrated travel as well, which I think will also help to take away some of the barriers that there are. We're also investing more in schemes around cycling, so the Cycle Boost scheme, which has been fantastic. I think those cycles have done between them something like 150,000 miles, which is enough to get around the world twice or something. Well, that's really impressive. I'm really pleased about that scheme. I want to do more of that. For me, actually, there are two issues that I'm responsible for, and I think they overlap massively. There's an issue around air quality, but there's also an issue about road safety as well. And part of the reason to have more cycles isn't just because we want cleaner air, it's actually because it makes people think more and more sensibly about the speed at which they're travelling. So there's a double win if we can get more cycles onto our roads there. We already know, which I'm sure many of you will know about that, the Community Diffusion Tube project, which is award-winning and groundbreaking, and I'm really pleased with what that does because it gives communities and offices and homes the tools that they need to tell a story about air quality. It gives people some data and some facts which they need to be able to engage and raise awareness of issues around air quality. We're also delivering the Plugged in South Yorkshire scheme to encourage the take-up of electric vehicles, especially for local businesses, and that was going to help around 100 small local businesses across South Yorkshire. That's really positive, and it will help them to cut their vehicle costs by about by up to 50%. But really important, even more than that, that gives them a competitive advantage and it improves air quality as well. And I'd be very keen to expand that scheme if we're able to. Just as important, we've also launched the In Motion scheme, which is about driver habits as well. So actually, we know that 82% of drivers do not drive optimally in terms of kind of high revs and standing at starts and that sort of thing. So In Motion is a scheme to work with businesses to help train drivers on ways to drive more economically friendly that actually also saves them petrol and diesel costs and indeed improves air quality. So that's really important. I suppose one thing to talk about is the low emission zone, in fact. We have now completed that study. It was groundbreaking. I think there's a view that the academic research that went behind that backed that up, was amongst the first of its type in the country. A whole range of problems around getting data and sharing data on number plates, which just kind of bamboozled me at one point, really. I lost the will to live, I think, possibly, but we got there in the end. And actually, that's a really important evidence and fact-based way that we can now start telling a story about what we need to do, know what we need to do, know what some of the issues are. We can now come up with a proper plan around a low emission zone. That's really important. And I think just as importantly was the challenge of working with bus operators and the Freight Transport Association and the Road Haulage Association as well. I think for very legitimate reasons, all three of those organisations were quite anxious about a low emission zone. and about the study that we were doing. But actually, I think we've managed to bring them with us, which is, again, no mean feat. We're also going to be doing far more to encourage and require our delivery partners to use CNG vehicles and certainly to not use diesel vehicles. Veolia, who do our waste in Sheffield, already have 10 waste wagons, which is more than any other city. They are CNG waste vehicles, which is really important. And we've drafted, though not yet published, a commercial advisory note, which is something we use in terms of our procurement practices to make sure that actually we are moving as speedily away from diesel and we become that diesel-free city that I'm sure everybody here wants us to become. As Jack said, I gave evidence to the Environmental Audit Select Committee, calling on the government to take the issue much more seriously. It was quite an interesting experience, not least I had to spend an afternoon with Boris Johnson, which was perhaps not something I'd want to repeat. I think what was really important to me in that, really, to be honest, was the difference between a very London-centric view that the government has, remembering that TfL has all the powers, Transport for London has all the powers that they could ever want in terms of air quality, and a regional mayor as well. It just kind of, I think, highlighted to me, and hopefully to them as well, the difference that actually working within a local government setting where, legally we are not allowed to run buses. We're not allowed to run two things as a local authority. We're not allowed to run buses, and we're not allowed to run power companies, both of which we used to run, both of which we used to run very successfully and very effectively, actually. So I think that was an eye-opening experience, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that final report. We've worked with partners across South Yorkshire to secure, I think, £215,000 to retrofit another 40 buses. That is predominantly the X76, 78, which runs from Doncaster to Rotherham to Sheffield. And again, we've also secured a further £165,000 for the retrofitting of ambulances to have solar panels on them as well. And that's really positive and I think quite innovative. Final thing in terms of kind of what we're doing and what we've done, because it's a fairly important list, but I'm not going to pretend it is sufficient for the challenge that we face. We know the government is launching its ultra-low emission vehicle scheme very shortly. We've met with them already. We are determined that we do everything we possibly can to put in a really powerful bid to that £500 million scheme, a really compelling bid to make Sheffield become, or to help Sheffield become, a national leader in cleaner vehicles and improved air quality. As I say, we've met with them. They're very keen, I think, to hear from Sheffield. They want to see exactly actually how you can transform a city, particularly one which has got an industrial heritage, from a kind of high polluting transport model to a different mobility plan. So we've kind of freed up some resources internally within the council to make sure we properly resource that bid. And I'm absolutely determined that we will do it. We will move heaven and earth to seize all opportunities we can to get our hands on that huge pot of money that there is there. So that gives you hopefully a sense of part of where I'm coming from, part of where the Labour Council is coming from. But I fully recognise that these kind of unprecedented and strong actions aren't enough if we are to come within the safe levels that the EU has prescribed anytime soon. And I think it's also important to say that we recognise that actually improvements in technology alone will not get us to where we need to be. And I think actually it sounds kind of like a truism, but I think it's worth repeating that we can't wait for technology to get us where we need to be. The components of where our poor air quality comes from in Sheffield means that actually technology will never solve this problem for us. That's kind of really quite depressing on one level, but really quite positive on another, because actually what it does is it emphasises to me about the importance of public leadership and of visibility and of community engagement. Because if we are honest with ourselves, we do need to say, and I think we should be, I think there's merit in saying again, these are not popular things we need to do. They're the right things to do, but I wouldn't pretend they are popular. There are a range of people who are determined, a range of interests who are determined not to let us take the action we need to take as a city, and I'm quite clear that I will not be able to do this by myself, and that we can't do this as a council by ourselves, but actually we need to expand and we need to hold our hands open and work with the whole of the community in Sheffield. I'll just give two examples to illustrate the point about how far we've got to go. The first, we had a debate recently on air quality in the council, in the chamber. It was a really positive debate. I thought I took a lot from it. One councillor, a UKIP councillor though, did stand up and say at one point, and I don't make this point to be partisan, I make it to give an example about the length of distance we've got to go to educate people about air quality. One councillor did stand up and said, kind of quoting now, because I did write it down at the time because I was so shocked really, the reason we have an air quality problem in Sheffield is because of the epidemic of speed humps that force you to accelerate after you've gone over them and pollute more. Now, there's no basis for that in any evidence at all. In fact, it's the opposite, actually. Speed bumps and driving slower improves air quality. So as I say, I don't make the point to be partisan or to be rude, but just to highlight the issue, I suppose, about awareness. And that view is not uncommon, I have to say, amongst people. When I represent a ward in the south of Sheffield, and when I go and talk to people, if I talk about air quality, we've got a range of air quality challenges. That view is not uncommon, that actually if we didn't have all these traffic lights and speed humps, we wouldn't have this problem. So that's an example, I suppose, of the level of public education engagement that we have got to do much better at than we are at the moment to make some changes. The second example is I got in a taxi a couple of weeks ago, I think in Leicester or something during the day. I was going from the station back home, and I was talking away to the taxi driver, as I tend to do, and he recognised me, and he said, "Oh, what are you doing? What are you up to? And are you still doing stuff on that environment thing?" And I said, "Yeah." And we started talking about climate change, we started talking about air quality, and he kind of looked at me when we stopped at a traffic light, and he turned around and looked at me and said, "Yeah, that's all really fine, but haven't we got more important things to worry about than saving the planet?" And I thought, so how do you answer that really? You know, it's kind of, well, not really. So there's something there about kind of the mechanics of it. I think the first example hopefully gives an indication of some of the mechanics that actually people think some of this stuff is you know, kind of counterintuitive, and that speed humps and traffic lights are causing the problem, and that isn't true. But then there's also something then about the second issue, I suppose, the second taxi driver who I guess tells me a story there about priorities, that actually even people who think it's important don't think it's the most important thing. Both of those views, I think, are incorrect, and we've got to do some work to challenge and educate people about both those approaches. But I'm really clear, as I say, that actually, and I wouldn't want people to look to the council to save us. You know, this is not me coming here saying, don't worry, the council is here to save you, because we're not. And actually, even if we ever had the resources to do the level of public engagement, the level of public awareness that's needed, we certainly haven't got them now. So this is kind of a call to arms, I suppose, really, that actually as a city, I think we need to show much clearer, much more united and determined leadership, just as the city can come together and has done on many occasions in its past to deal with big problems. I think this is another example. So that's part of why next week we're launching our air quality education campaign, which is about raising awareness and encouraging everyone to do their bit, particularly drivers of private cars, and also trying to get the message home to people about diesel, because it is still the case. Every time I give a talk to anyone, I probably don't need to do it to you, but every time I do a talk to anyone, I will kind of very often start and finish it by saying diesel causes cancer, which is a shocking kind of 3-word statement that we can never say enough, actually, in terms of the impact that has, and in terms of the kind of shock that people feel, because people feel they were sold a pop, that actually they were told diesel was better for them, better for the environment, and it was cheaper. And actually, for us to turn around now and start saying to people, well, actually, it is cheaper, there is less carbon, but it's far more polluting in terms of particulate matter, is quite shocking. And I think very often there's a response that is quite angry when you get that. So I'm really clear that although the council can and should go give those messages, and we'll be doing our bit through the largest public awareness campaign for air quality in Sheffield ever, that will not be sufficient for the number of people we need to reach and the kind of change in culture that we need to achieve. So I just want to finish really by underlining once again and reiterating that the council is absolutely determined to work with everyone and anyone on the issue of air quality, and that we shouldn't underestimate the focus and the determination of the detractors in this fight either. I'm quite clear that actually, you know, there are a range of people who do not want us to improve air quality, who do not want to make some of the choices and the consequences that come from those improvements. So I'm very clear that we need to work together. Much more than that, we need to build a stronger consensus for action. And I think in terms of the council, in terms of process, that's where the reviewed and refreshed Air Quality Action Plan comes into effect. I think some of the actions we need to take clearly won't be popular. Some of them, I suspect, will be deeply unpopular, actually. But they are the right thing to do for our city nonetheless, for our older people and for our children. So I hope that this issue and this conference is the start of that conversation about how we move our city forward together, and about how we take even stronger action to help tackle this major problem. Thank you very much.
Tell us what's happened when you hear from probably one of the topmost experts about emissions and things like that the buses that you've been obliged to buy don't deliver the emission savings. How do you feel about that?
Okay. Well, I'm interested that no local authorities admitted it, because we did admit it. In fact, I think it's within my submission to the Environmental Audit Committee that what we thought was going to happen has not happened. So I don't think we have any shame in that. There was no way that we could have known that. I think that there is still an improvement in Euro 5s compared to Euro 3s. It's just not what we were told that there should have been. So it's better than what we had before, but clearly not as good as we were told it was going to be. That is a huge disappointment. It makes me feel very angry, to answer the question directly. I think that, for me, it says two things, really. The first is around making sure that in the future, the industry, and again, it's one of the things that I said in Parliament, that the industry is required and mandated to do live testing as opposed to just doing laboratory testing. So doing testing on bus emissions, which are, when they are in their lab under kind of perfect conditions with no wind and no hills, will give a Euro 5 engine a Euro 5 result. But roads don't work like that, actually, particularly not roads in Sheffield. So for me, I think there's something about making sure that tests are done which are live tests, and they should be mandatory before any bus is sold, rather than just kind of doing the lab test and saying, yes, it's great, it's a Euro 5, because, you know, in this kind of plant in Germany, when there's, as I say, no wind, no incline, no problems with the road, then it gives you a Euro 5 result. You'd be surprised if it didn't give you a Euro 5 result in those instances, I suppose. So that's the first thing in terms of action. The second thing, you know, which I don't mind revealing, because I don't think it's a shock, but I think if we're angry about it, the bus companies are even more angry, I have to say, actually. That, you know, we've obviously invested a large amount of money to make sure we get engines up to the standards that they should be in. And actually, it's the bus companies who bought those buses themselves who are, I think, incandescent and furious, that haven't been told to meet these standards. They bought in good faith the buses that they wanted and that they needed, only to find out that they didn't. I think their view is not just there should be mandatory testing, but actually there should be guarantees alongside warranties that go with engines as well. So it makes me feel very angry, but it also makes me feel quite determined that in the future, when we buy buses, we need to be making sure we're buying ones which are live tested, not just lab tested. And I think there's something then about consumer rights for bus companies, given the fact they have been sold something which is clearly insufficient for the purposes they were told it was.
Maybe I just can explain what happened. Your colleague in Berlin, Mr. Lutz, who is quite famous, you might have met him, he really escalated this issue in a meeting with the manufacturers of buses, and the focus was there mostly on buses for an urban use. And he basically told OEs that they would have to pay for the failure of their buses in an urban drive site. Because it is an embarrassment for local authorities who spend the money, the bus operators, of course the customers and so on. And the scandal throughout Europe is really massive. And because everybody's embarrassed, it's not really a public issue yet. And the shocking issue is one, first of all, this difference between the results which are sold on the leaflets and the real emission standards. And secondly, that the technology in order to get these buses with low or almost zero emissions are there. Yeah? Diesel buses don't have to emit PM that cause cancer. It's quite an easy proven technology. So we are lucky in that sense that it hasn't escalated throughout Europe, but the problem that you have in Sheffield, that they have in London, is all throughout Europe, everywhere where these buses were sold and don't live up to these emissions.
I absolutely agree with you that the problem is how we engage with the public, and to me that's what the debate really must be about today, as you were suggesting. Two things, two questions. How do we try and get the connection between sort of air pollution and problems here with the climate change issues that are related? Because it feels like that is beginning to get under people's skin. I mean, 400,000 marching in New York is unprecedented on a climate change issue, big world demonstration. Arctic ice flooding, flooding in the UK. Should we be making the connections with these global issues?
We can try. I don't know how much it costs, so I'm not going to promise we're going to do it, but it seems like a very sensible idea. It seems to me like the kind of logical extension of the diffusion tubes, really, that we've got some which are standard and which are set and don't really move very much. That, as I said in my talk, kind of gives us a huge amount of data, which is very personable to people, and people go, I cannot believe, I was at Radio Sheffield the other day and they wanted a tube and they really wanted to see actually how polluted it was. As it happens, we had one outside anyway. And actually that kind of really focuses people's minds on issues, I think. So I think that is the next logical step. I have no idea how much they cost and if it's doable and what the data is. Oggo is nodding at me, so it suggests that it is possible. So if we can do it, we will do it. Again, I think what I would underline is that actually us putting the money into it is one thing, making sure we get sufficient breadth and depth across the city is quite another. And I suppose I'd also say, again, because this is why I'm in politics, and this is why I stood for election, I would want to be absolutely sure that those were being used in the areas where there is not just the worst air pollution, but where there is the worst poverty as well. So that's kind of the only caveat I'd add to it, to make sure we use those in areas of high pollution and high poverty, so we can actually make sure we are getting to the people who are the most affected by some of these issues. But if we can do it, and if someone else has done it, I'd love to hear about that, but we'll absolutely look at it, certainly.